William Wallace is one of the most iconic people in Scottish history. He is considered today Braveheart and a subject of the Blockbuster film, but what is the true story behind Wallace? He was a pain for King Edward I of England, and did have a number of victories against the English army. Within Scotland he was seen as a heroic figure, and he became the guardian of Scotland, but he fell into the hands of the English, and in particular Edward I, who had Wallace executed in brutal fashion. He was seen as a huge threat to the English, and for this, there was only one way to deal with William Wallace. So join us today as we look at the merciless execution of William Wallace, and remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Born around the year 1270, William Wallace's early life remains much of a mystery. There is not much known about him, and it's believed his father was a Scottish landowner, but it's not known for certain who his parents actually were. During his early life, King Alexander III ruled Scotland, and the country was peaceful and stable, but things changed following his death. As time went on, the throne passed to Alexander's granddaughter Margaret, the Maid of Norway, but she was a child living in Norway. There was a lack of concrete successor to the throne, and Robert the Bruce even tried to take it, to become the King of Scotland. But the stability within Scotland was waning, and the country was heading towards civil war. Edward I was invited from England to help deal with the problems over who was the rightful king, and at Berwick upon Tweed Castle, Edward I stated that John Balliol had the best claim. Because of this, John was made king, but he was constantly undermined and controlled by King Edward, acting almost as a puppet, and the English king saw Scotland as a country easily conquerable and as a state within England, not a country with borders. Edward even forced the Scots to pay him homage, and the Scots grew annoyed with the English and their king. After this, a council was established, which formed an alliance with France, which caused outrage in England, as Edward did not get on with the French. This was viewed by Edward as a decree of war, and he eventually raided the border town of Berwick upon Tweed, and laid waste to the town, massacring the population. He was well regarded as a military commander, and Edward was bested by no one within Britain at the time, but during the invasion, it's considered that William Wallace was a soldier within the Scottish army, and may have even fought against the English and gained some experience of fighting them. He could have even been within Edward's army, and fought with the English as an archer, but little about this is known. He was described as a tall man, with the body of a giant, broad in the hips with strong arms and legs. But within Scotland, the actions of the English king caused great anger, and an uprising began against Edward. William Wallace joined, and the first act of defiance he took part in was murdering the English Sheriff of Lanark in May 1297. After this, he joined forces with another Scottish commander, who in coalition raided Scone. Wallace was in charge of a local army, and they began to attack the English settlements along the River Tay and River Forth, and a number of other rebellions across Scotland were causing issues. Eventually the nobles would give in to the English, but the rebels, including William Wallace, were not involved in this, and they continued the fight. Wallace set up a base in which he would embark on raiding English settlements from inside of the Ettrick Forest. He joined forces with Andrew Murray, and then on the 11th of September 1297, the English army were confronted by William Wallace and his army, along with Andrew Murray's army, near to the Forth River, close to Stirling. Despite being outnumbered, William Wallace's Scottish army were victorious against the English, and he used his expertise at reading a battle to command his forces excellently. John de Warenne, the 6th Earl of Surrey's army, was made up of around 3,000 cavalry soldiers and 9,000 infantry soldiers who crossed the river, but then a narrow bridge stopped the soldiers crossing. Wallace got his men to be brave and to stand in, and they then managed to cross the river and massacre the English. Because of this, the rogue commander's reputation became popular, and his confidence grew. Wallace and Andrew Murray then became the guardians of the Kingdom of Scotland. Wallace then raided into northern England, pushing back the English, and he went through Northumberland. The Scottish earls saw him as a valuable weapon, and he was knighted, but the English king was furious at Wallace's antics, and he struck back. He ordered a second invasion of Scotland in April 1298, and he recruited a large number of soldiers to fight against the Scottish, and paid 25,000 of them. Edward raided a number of Scottish settlements, and won a number of lost castles back, but he could not find William Wallace. The Scots were behind them, watching what was going on, but Edward's army was crippled with food shortages and morale problems. But then he heard that Wallace was based near to Falkirk. Along with his English army, Edward quickly went there to try and defeat them, but on the 22nd of July 1298, the Battle of Falkirk erupted, and it was here where Wallace was defeated. Edward's army used Welsh longbowmen, who devastated the Scottish ranks, and the cavalry used by Edward kept ruthlessly attacking, and Wallace's circular defensive formation became exposed. Edward's men continued to attack and gaps appeared in the tight Scottish formations, and the English waded in and caused devastation. The Scottish suffered heavily, and after this Wallace managed to escape, and he resigned as the Guardian of Scotland, with his reputation in tatters. After the Battle of Falkirk, he went AWOL, and it's considered he could have gone to France to see if the French king would help the Scots, or he may have even travelled to ask Rome for help. But in 1304, he was back living in Scotland, and was back on the battlefield, but he now was a wanted man, and the English wanted him captured. He was seen as a guerrilla leader, but the Scottish nobles yet again gave in to Edward, but Wallace would not. He kept a low profile until the 5th of August 1305, where he was captured and handed to the English. A Scottish knight loyal to the English betrayed Wallace and captured him, and he was handed over near to Glasgow. His captor was working for the Sheriff of Dumbarton, and he began to track Wallace, and he was seized under the cover of darkness in his bed before being given over. Wallace was then transported to London, where on the 23rd of August 1305 he was paraded throughout the city to a rather triumphant setting. It was Edward I's capital, and it was also here where Wallace was tried. He was taken through London to Westminster Hall, where the crowds abused him and jeered at him. There was no trial, it was just a routine hearing for Wallace to hear what he was accused of, and for the sentence to be given. He was allowed no defence, and was crowned with a crown of oak, symbolising that he was a king of the outlawed Scots. He was accused of treason, and when accused of this he said, "I cannot be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject," but regardless of this he was sentenced to death. There was no wait for his execution. He was taken from the hearing to the Tower of London, where he was stripped naked. He was then dragged throughout the streets of London, with his heels tied to the back of a horse. This must have been incredibly painful, as he was dragged for a distance of 4 miles, with his head smashing against the cobbled streets. The Londoners were hurling abuse and obscenities towards him all along the way, and he was taken to Smithfield. Throughout the centuries, Smithfield was a prominent place of execution, and during the Tudor period it became famous as a site where burnings at the stake would occur. But Wallace was to be hanged, drawn and quartered, the sentence for treason which was incredibly brutal and sadistic. William Wallace arrived, and he was unhooked from the horses, and he was led up to the scaffold in front of the crowd. It's likely that the Londoners had learned of this rogue Scottish giant, who caused great suffering to Edward I's English army. He was handed over to the executioner, who placed a noose around his neck and over the gallows, and then the executioner would have pulled down, suspending Wallace by the neck above the crowd. Just before he passed away, he was then cut down from the gallows and was placed onto a table. It was here where he was disemboweled and castrated, and his entrails, liver, heart and lungs were pulled out and burned in front of him. During this time it's likely that Wallace was alive before his heart and major organs were removed. After this horrific spectacle he was then hacked into 4 pieces, being quartered, and his head was chopped off by an axeman. The remains of William Wallace were then sent to 4 places of Edward I's kingdom to serve as a warning, mostly in the north and in Scotland. These were Berwick, Newcastle, Perth and Stirling, and his head was dipped in tar and placed on a pole on London Bridge. William Wallace is most known today for being the main character in Braveheart, a film with many historical inaccuracies, but the truth is he was a brilliant military commander. He rose to prominence against the English and King Edward I, who himself was a brilliant military leader. Wallace did get the upper hand over Edward several times, but he was betrayed and was then handed over to the English to meet his end in horrifically savage ways. His defiance against the English led to him being horrifically executed in Smithfield. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.